So what we're telling you is to grow it and produce enough compost to do a wheat crop. You need to buy carbon offset credits just to justify it as a neutral activity, a massive amount of carbon credits. And that's just the beginning.
Total greenhouse gas emissions. Here's emissions, production and fuel. 375 to 1,400 kgs of carbon dioxide emissions produced to fertilize a 10-ton per hectare crop with compost. Urea, 150 to 160.
So with that,
we're like 200 times more. No, I'm not saying, hear me clearly, I'm not saying I think that the solution for everything is petroleum-based urea. I'm not saying that.
Welcome to the Soilcraft Regen Agronomy Podcast. At Soilcraft, our mission is to innovate and lead in the field of regenerative agronomy, forging a path that empowers farmers to produce food that nourishes and heals both the planet and its inhabitants.
Hey, welcome to the Soilcraft This Week in Regen podcast, where we talk about either something that's intrigued us throughout the week or just something that's on our mind. This week we want to talk about the dirty work, the economics of building the soil. So, Craig, I was just the other day, 2 days ago in fact, standing in front of this beautiful, very well done compost pile. It's more of a small scale compost pile, but I'm sitting there looking at this thing thinking, this is beautiful. There's no question, like it smells amazing. The bugs are at work. But in my mind, something said, this isn't the whole story. And as we went to look at the vegetable production, I'm looking at beautiful veg grown pretty much only from compost. Well, actually just from compost. I'm thinking, okay, this is amazing. But what really stuck in my mind is, what does this beautiful pile represent? And by that I mean, okay, we're growing a vegetable crop with only compost as input, right? Green. Everybody knows compost is green. But the first thought that came to my mind was, what space, what resources were required to make this compost? And then if we take that compost and apply it, how much compost do we need? Oh yeah, I know those quick figures. And then to grow one crop. So in short, guys, for organic production, generally speaking, a rough middle of the road estimate is 10 tons per hectare, right? But the trouble is when we're in a smaller scale setting, and that's where a lot of these come from, we really don't take into account that, because we make this pile, and we go spread this pile, and then we grow this beautiful vegetable, etc. And wow, wonderful, awesome. But the challenge to that is, what does it represent? So in short, I start sailing with my assistant, ChatGPT, and I start to ask questions like, how many hectares did it take to produce the green and the brown and the manure for this compost pile? And basically it takes 2 to 4 hectares to produce enough compost for 1 hectare of vegetable production. So it came from somewhere, right? Yeah. So wow, that's crazy when you think about that. So that takes a lot more land space, great. Then we're starting to talk about the efficiency of synthetic sources like urea. And so then we start going down the process. Yeah, but that's from crude oil. How much crude oil? And so this is what we're diving down, this path of how green is compost. And poor urea gets bashed about in our space. In fact, I was just getting bashed about from a lovely friend the other day about this. But I mean, it's crazy, isn't it, Craig? Because we can go down a path and be like, this is beautiful. And it is, there's no question.
Yeah.
It smells like heaven.
For sure.
But what does it take to make 1 hectare worth of compost? 10 tons per hectare. And then what are the alternatives?
Yeah, so we were looking at it, and there's different kinds of compost. Obviously, you have the high carbon composts, you have the composted manures, obviously coming off of typically feedlots or chicken houses, and then you have vermicompost. And just on that note, talking about how much does it take? How much material does it take to produce enough to grow a crop? So just to give you an idea, I'm going to pull up here real quick the numbers because I was going over it here. And It was very interesting. So with thermic compost, or traditional compost, where it heats up. I think what Denver was looking at was a thermal compost pile, and then you have different methods. But interestingly, the one for vermicast is actually it's anywhere from 200% to 300% more nitrogen per unit than is a compost that's not done by worms. And so, it's very, very interesting to see the efficiency. So now let's imagine for a second we want to get 1 kg of nitrogen. So 1 unit of nitrogen.
Yeah, we're talking 1 unit.
Unit.
And we're talking pure. So unit.
Yeah, unit of nitrogen.
Is that like synthetic,
nitrogen.
like urea is 46% nitrogen, but when we say 1 unit, we're saying 1 unit, which really represents about 2.2 whatever kgs of actual urea to make 1 kg of nitrogen.
So a traditional thermal compost, a low nitrogen compost pile, not including a high percentage of animal manure.
Yeah,
it's going to take 400 to 600 kgs of material to make 1 kg of nitrogen, and then time, of course. We'll talk about the other things that it'll take too. So 400 to so more than a half ton of material per 1 unit of nitrogen. Now start extrapolating that over your nitrogen needs, even as efficient as compost might be. Then manure compost. Let's say you had a feedlot next door. You have the corral.
Yeah, you got that free nitrogen sitting there.
You're still talking about 250 to 400 kgs of material to make 1 unit of nitrogen. But then you come to vermicast. So if you want to go down the compost hole, vermicast is your friend. Vermicast, it only takes 75 to 150 kgs of vermicast to make 1 unit of nitrogen. Now, it's still a lot, but if you want to be in the compost space, vermicast is hands down the better source of nitrogen from the standpoint of nitrogen efficiency.
And you don't have the turning, the pile turning, and
all of that. So I think that right off the bat was interesting, but so that's where it really got interesting.
But so the efficiency is quite interesting and quite intriguing, because there's no question it's far more efficient. But of course, I think what we're really trying to hammer at, folks, is that anytime we have to handle products and transport products, our efficiencies just go down the drain. And again, at scale, there are economies of scale, and you could argue, but for small scale gardening or whatever, you can manage, and that fine, that's true. You can manage that, and that takes care of a lot of things. But still, the efficiency of actually producing nitrogen, which is needed for the crop, in any other way other than growing it in its space, which we'll talk about in future episodes, because there's a cost there. There's time, there's water, there's opportunity cost because you're not growing a crop, because you're growing your fertilizer there. And then even that, there's nitrogen efficiency through decomposition and everything. But what's unbelievable, I think, as we start going down this rabbit hole, and boy, is it ever a rabbit hole, is you start to see immutable laws, don't you?
Yeah. So one of the things, that's often talked about is, okay, if a smallholder is doing compost, well, that's great because, they've got unlimited amount of time and no money. So I'm going to put the dark hat on and say, is that an acceptable concept long term? No question. I have no problem with that as a bridge concept to better practices. It's better than worn out fields long term. But it presupposes that someone shouldn't value the time value of money because, well, they don't have any money, so therefore their time's worth nothing. Well, that is, to me, that's,
they have no
the only way that system continues indefinitely is to say that people should be in abject poverty forever.
Yeah.
And is that, when we're saying we're helping and we're getting a compost system in place, if we're teaching that as the end, then we're also teaching people that at the end they need to be in poverty forever in order to justify the costs of it. And to give an example, even if you come to a larger scale, let's say you're a farmer and you're turning compost and doing larger scale compost for your fields, one of the things we always talk about, you have a nice compost pile out in your backyard, and your friends come over and they pat you on the back because you're environmentally conscious, and you're doing the right thing for the environment, and you're doing the right thing for the food you're producing for your family, and you look great. And the guy next door who brought out the bag of urea is part of the evil empire. But let's talk about let's talk about energy use. Denver, energy use. Let's go.
That's what I can't get away from. Number one is the immutable laws. And when I say immutable laws, like, it takes what it takes. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, right? We know this. These are basic scientific principles. And what I get frustrated about is we often go on what I see is leprechaun, unicorn, rainbow, fool errands where we think we can make something from nothing.
Yeah.
What? And surely Denver, we're not. No, but we do. We're all prone to this. We all want to believe, and we all want this to be true, but everything has a cost. You can't make something for free. And so we have to boil things down to measurable units. Yeah. And as it turns out, one of the most measurable units, or one of the best ways we can look at creation of nitrogen, is through megajoules. It's through energy.
Yeah.
The energy it takes. We know we have this big old electrical or gas ball in the sky that's providing energy to our planet that we need to capture, right? And it's we either capture it now in photosynthesis, or it's ancient sunlight in fossil fuels. Either way, it comes into the planet from one way, and it becomes stored, and then we use it. But it takes the same amount of energy either way. That's the spoiler is.
So how many
megajoules?
How many? Well, let's start out with a liter of crude oil. How much does it take to make
it's about a 1 to 1
of urea?
1 kg of nitrogen, not urea, of nitrogen takes about a liter of crude oil to make. And it takes about 40, 50 megajoules of energy.
Okay. So now, how about your compost pile? Oof. I mean, certainly your compost pile, this green, beautiful thing, is so much more efficient because it's so natural. 37.5 megajoules. 37.5 megajoules. We're talking about a fractional difference in just the energy to produce it. Now,
and that's looking at the pile versus the process. That's the Haber-Bosch process versus the pile.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with, that's just making.
So if you want to go down the compost list, again, vermicast wins. 20 megajoules, still a lot.
Yes.
But almost half of what it would do to do either the thermal or the Haber-Bosch process. Now,
where does the dirty work begin, though?
Now it really gets fun.
I'm sorry.
Now we're talking about carbon emissions. Okay, so let's talk about carbon emissions. I mean, obviously, we're talking about doing compost because we want to grow healthy food, and we want a healthy planet, and we want things to be in balance, and we want them to be regenerative.
Because everybody knows we're emitting massive amounts of CO2 through Haber-Bosch, through petroleum, right? We are. And
so let's talk about that. So what I looked at is, I've got 60 hectares of wheat out in the pivot, and to grow a good crop of wheat, it's often suggested that you need about 200 units of nitrogen to do that. I think it's a pretty common number, plus or minus a bit, depending on your density and whatever, for irrigated wheat. And so I put that in, and I said, okay, so for me to get compost that is equivalent in providing the nitrogen for that, what would I need in comparison to the demand of urea? And so when I ran through the numbers, it gets really, really interesting. So oftentimes, one of the things that we don't talk about when we talk about natural processes or organic farming is the dirty secret that it's not so green after all. So to do that, I would need to put on, let me just give you the number here. So the amount of compost would be massive. I think we
usually with our organic
26.1 tons.
Yeah, that's building
to reach a wheat crop level of nitrogen. You could do some other things, but looking at that, if you pull that out, let's talk about the equivalent amount of use that's needed. So to produce compost and to spread your compost. and to
This
get
is
your
where it gets
compost on site. So
really-
I'm talking about within 60 kilometers of you, because most people aren't going to have the amount of compost on site to do what's needed here. You're talking about 18,000 liters of diesel that's needed to move that product
For your pivots.
and to spread it on 2 pivots. So
60
60 hectares, okay?
That comes to about 30 to 80 liters of diesel.
Yeah, it takes about 105
Per hectare.
liters of diesel to spread the urea.
Yep.
Okay. Now let's talk about how much CO2 is in the diesel for the organic system. That's 48 tons of carbon emitted in the process of making the diesel to spread your organic compost on the field, versus 281 kgs that was used to make the diesel that you needed to spread your urea. So right now, we're at a major deficit. Now, people say, well, okay, the cost of manufacture. Even if you go into Chat GPT or these guys and you ask them these questions, they say, well, yeah, there's negligible CO2 for manufacturing your compost. Well, that's true, because the microbes are busy doing the program, and we don't calculate the input. But if you calculate the input, and I did this, so this is where your mind can begin to explode. So the composting process. So the process to produce urea, to grow a crop of wheat in the irrigation on the 60 hectares, 96 tons. So let's just round it to 100 tons of carbon emissions. That's spreading it, delivering it, putting it on the field, 100 tons of carbon emitted in that process, including manufacturing. To do compost, to put out the equivalent units of nitrogen to grow that crop, you're talking about 3,048 tons.
Oh, man.
Okay, did you hear that? 3,048
That's the opposite direction we want to go.
Carbon. So what we're telling you is to grow it and produce enough compost to do a wheat crop. You need to buy carbon offset credits just to justify it as a neutral activity. A massive amount of carbon credits. And that's just the beginning.
I mean,
It gets better.
to try and put it into, we'll go to a per hectare. We should do percentages and action. And we'll do a long form on this.
Yeah.
For a couple of reasons. One, because I think that, here in Africa, we've got these roaming ants that travel in bands, and these things are vicious and terrifying. And if you really want to give yourself torture, you stir them with a stick. And I feel like that's probably what we're doing. We're stirring somewhat. But to get down to it, guys, I mean, this is the crazy part. I mean, to produce compost on a 10-ton per hectare basis for spreading versus 300 kg per hectare urea. And that's actually not very fair. To be honest, it would probably take twice as much compost. Yeah. We're talking manure compost, highly efficient, but I want to give it a fighting chance. Yeah. So I'm telling you, the gap is greater. But on a per hectare basis, guys, for enough nitrogen to grow a crop like a wheat crop, the greenhouse gas emissions is going to be 300 to 1,200 kgs of carbon dioxide versus 150 kgs of carbon dioxide equivalent in urea. The fuel used for transport and spreading, like you said, 28 to 80 liters of diesel versus 1.2 to 3.5 liters of diesel. This is on a per hectare basis for spreading. Emissions for fuel use, 75 to 215 kgs of carbon dioxide for compost. 3 to 9 of carbon dioxide for urea. Total greenhouse gas emissions. Here's emissions, production and fuel. 375 to 1,400 kgs of carbon dioxide emissions produced to fertilize a 10-ton per hectare crop with compost. Urea, 150 to 160.
So with that,
with like 200 times more.
Yeah, it go do the math and
we're talking nitrogen.
Nitrogen, yep.
We're talking nitrogen. We're not talking carbon, and I know, and I would argue that compost, but the problem is most people in the organic space are looking at compost to satisfy nitrogen. So when they say, I have a nitrogen need, we spread compost or manure. Well, we can't do manure, we need compost. Why? Because we have weed seeds, we have pathogens, it's too hot, we have all sorts of issues. So compost is the solution. But it's not the solution. The numbers are so overwhelmingly clear that compost emits more costs more, is less efficient, all these problems, not to mention the fact that it takes 2 to 4 times the amount of land space to produce the compost, to produce the crop on. So the inefficiencies are beyond. Now, I'm not saying, hear me clearly, I'm not saying I think that the solution for everything is petroleum-based urea. I'm not saying that.
Just in case someone's tempted to
I'm not saying
misconstrue what's
that.
being said here.
I'm just saying the problem is we often get into these spaces, it's dogmatic, it's nearly religious, where we think that compost is just innately great.
Yeah.
But the cost of producing it, the cost of making it is far from the best way. Now, when you look at it in terms of carbon, yes, we're adding carbon back, but we're not. Because when you look at the carbon emissions from it, and the fuel and everything taken, guys, the carbon that you're putting in is at a loss. So the greatest advantage you have is putting stable carbon there. But guys, what we'll address in a future episode is the better way to do it. Because in order to actually grow soils, not at a loss, I would argue it has to be done in place. It has to be done in place. And where we'll go beyond this is looking at how do we build bridges in the meantime to build soil, which we're doing here. I think we're approaching our 4% OM. We're subsidizing it, but from the numbers presented here, there's no better way to do so than to use urea and make synthetic manure by using liquid carbon sources, microbes, feeding microbes, cover crops, and building our soil in place to get to that 4% OM where we can become efficient. And then beyond that, I mean, this is where I'll go into, this is my feeling, but there's no better way than using cows, but the emission from methane is massive. But cows in place with crops, agroforestry, silvopastures, so that those emissions don't leave. They go to the tree, get sucked in, and pumped right back into the soil.
Yeah. So just in closing, I couldn't resist. So I went online and I put the query and I said, so with these numbers, these carbon numbers we've looked at and the cost of composting, says, what if you cut every tree and every plant on the planet? Could we replace the currently used units of nitrogen that are being used on the planet? And let me read you the summary that I got.
Brace yourself.
Prepare. What would the cost be? The answer was yes, you could produce enough nitrogen to use for 10 years. So there's 10 years of total nitrogen available. If you composted every tree and living plant on the planet, you have 10 years of the current use of nitrogen available on Earth. Now, I asked and said, so what would the impact of that be? Obviously, we know it would be catastrophic, but here's what ChatGPT has to say about the impact of using compost to replace nitrogen worldwide. There would be global ecosystem collapse. There'd be no trees, no food, and no oxygen regulation. There would be mass extinction, a climate spiral, massive CO2 release from the composting process. So, there's enough for 10 years. Is it remotely feasible or wise to do? And it says absolutely not. And what would happen? Total biosphere collapse. So, enjoy your day. Go out and make some compost. And we'll see you on the other side of the end of the age.
I feel a rebuttal coming. I know there's someone that's going to be visiting. Now, we're always trying to get people to come and see and join the podcast as guests. Be our guest. Now, look, we for balance, we need to be fair probably and argue that, because there's no question, the answer isn't drill, baby, drill, and most of this comes from natural gas sources, but
brought to you by my friends from BP Energy.
You would think. And look, hey, in full disclosure, I don't have compost. I don't get paid for compost. I don't get paid for urea. I don't sell nitrogen fertilizers. So full disclosure, nobody's sponsoring this episode. It's not brought to you by BP. So we'll get into that. But I think, and we can hit the numbers on that, because nor is it sustainable. We know there's also a finite amount of time for the petroleum-based inputs as well, guys. But that's why we got to stop telling ourselves lies. We have to stop telling lies. And it's easiest to lie to ourselves. So, hey, hit us with the comments. I'm sure there's going to be no end to comments. Thanks for joining us this week in Regen. See you next week in Regen.
And one week we'll actually talk about why you should use compost and for what reason.
That's right. So, it does have a purpose. It has a need, just not in mass production. agriculture.
See you on the other side next week.
Thanks so much for joining us as we expand our paradigms and explore what's possible in the realm of regen agronomy. If you would like to contact us or learn more about what we do, please visit our website at www.soilcraft.com, as well as our YouTube channel. If you have topics you would like us to unpack or stories, please connect with us so that we can share them with others.